Hi everyone. I just put together a short lecture um, talking about supervision. So this sort of goes along with chapter 3 in the Ward book, and it's interesting to me that they've titled the chapter teamwork, and I think that sort of gets at the this view of supervision that they have, that it's sort of an interactive transactional process between you and your supervisor. It's probably a good way in general to look at supervision. Um, and that, I think, one of the things that sort of suggests is that communication is pretty important in supervision. So supervisors aren't always going to know what it is you need. Part of our job as learners here, as students, is to sort of assess what it is we need and sort of make that known to our supervisors so that they can help us with the growth process. So I realized I advanced the slide here a little bit before I was done, but with those previous comments. But a supervisor's role is partially administrative. They obviously have their own sort of responsibilities with the agency. They might include, they might have a caseload, clinical responsibilities of their own. But a big part, obviously, of a supervisor's role is also to evaluate you. And again, that should be sort of a process that you're involved with. The Part of what you're evaluated on is the extent of growth and growing in sort of the right direction. So when it comes time to do that evaluation stuff, sort of at the end of the semester, it's not as though um, you need to um, you need to meet a certain set of standards. It's that you need to show evidence that you're in the process of starting to grow to meet those certain standards, if that sort of makes sense. But supervisors also have sort of an educational role. An educational role with you. So you should be discussing cases and sort of your work responsibilities, what it is you're doing. It in an ideal world, supervision would always sort of complement and reinforce what you're doing in the classroom. That doesn't always happen because, frankly, um, things just don't always line up that way. But if you should be able to sort of sit back and think about supervision and the stuff that you're doing in the classroom and see some broad parallels. Um, if that's something you're struggling with, you're not seeing those parallels, let me know and let's talk about some of that stuff. Um, it it, um, it might be there, and we just need to recognize it, or it if it's not there, that's something we can sort of address um, as well. Good supervisors. So in addition to having these sort of administrative and educational roles, they also have these um, kind of supportive roles, and this gets to sort of preparing for supervision and how one conducts oneself during supervision. So, good supervisors are supportive. They are empathic and understanding when there's a difficult case, um, or something happens that's really problematic in a case. Good supervisors will process your feelings with you about how the internship is progressing, particularly because growth is hard, and growing into sort of a professional, independent, practicing social worker is really extraordinarily difficult. So they should be willing to talk about some emotional content with you. Now, that's not to say um, that that supervision is therapy. It's not. And indeed, if you feel as though you need additional support, um, Edinburgh has resources available, and I'm certainly available to consult with you as well. Um, as an instructor, I'm not a therapist either. I'm part of your educational team, but I certainly would be willing to talk about some high level things with you, particularly if you were struggling with a certain part of the internship or a certain part of a case or something like that. In general, so before we move on, this is sort of an important point to remember that supervision, while it is about growth, and growth does have an emotional sort of component to it, your supervisor is not a therapist, and so things that happen outside of the internship that aren't related to the internship, probably don't belong in the content of supervision. Things that have happened in one's past probably don't belong in the content of supervision. Supervision is a pretty it's a pretty present focused space. So it's really things that are happening now in the internship / field experience. This idea of scheduling supervision is part of the communication process I alluded to back at the beginning of this talk. Ideally, supervision would happen during the same hour on the same day each week. So Thursdays at 3 o'clock or something like that, or Mondays at 2, or whatever works. I realize that doesn't always fit within sort of the day-to-day activities of some agencies, and that time for supervision has to be sort of scheduled each week. That's okay. It happens. If in general, if you're not getting regular supervision, let me know. I know sometimes supervisions are canceled, people are sick, or they have to leave early. Things happen. So if you find that you're not getting supervision regularly, let me know. And certainly if you have a question about, you're kind of like, am I getting regular supervision? It seems like 1 out of 4 is getting canceled. That's something we could talk about, and if need be, we can loop in Natalie Montero from the field office to talk about that kind of thing. The other sort of model of supervision is kind of like they call it, an ongoing or an ad hoc model of supervision, and that would be sort of time with the supervisor before or after a task, before or after sort of a given thing happens, and that fits more with the work and the rhythm of some agencies. So if that's the model that you find yourself in, that's not problematic. It just makes sure it's happening regularly. And again, if there's sort of a question about what constitutes regular in sort of an ongoing supervision model, let me know. We'll talk about it. There is sort of an ethical responsibility to get supervision. It's a big part of the educational process. It's a big part of learning how to become a professional social worker. So that's why that slide is there. So I, in general, sort of agree with the authors of the book in that we, as students, should be prepared. We should come in prepared for supervision. I think this is part of establishing a professional identity. It's part of establishing professional behavior, and it actually helps with sort of setting boundaries and bringing in things to supervision that are sort of appropriate and work related. So I recommend an agenda. I don't know that it needs to be necessarily typed out. It could be something sort of informal. You have a list of things on a notepad or something like that. I've had supervision where I have typed out sort of a formal agenda each time, and that was nothing more than sort of a numbered list on a sheet of paper that I printed, and then I printed one for myself and one for my supervisor. That's a style issue. Some supervisors prefer that, some don't. So I would at least have an informal agenda if a formal agenda is not asked of you. I would be prepared with notes and questions. It could be questions about cases. It could be thoughts about the week. It could be something that struck you as odd or interesting or noteworthy. So you should bring questions as well as sort of things you think are successes from a given week, or from a given from the last time you saw your supervisor. I'd also be prepared with something to write on in a calendar. I have never been a big fan of bringing computers to supervision. It has always felt like, both when I've been a supervisor and a supervisee, it feels a little bit like something is um, in between me and the other person. That's sort of my own personal hang up. I realize there are ways that people do things differently. Um, um, so if a computer or an iPad or something like that does work for you, that's fine. But um, um, in sort of that your ongoing self-reflection and self-assessment process, ask yourself if that device is sort of getting in the way of a good supervisory process. Ask if it's sort of getting in the way of growth. So notes are important, and I think it's okay to sit and take notes. Again, this is probably why pad and paper works best. Works better than like an iPad or a tablet or something like that. Um, and the benefit of sort of taking notes is that that's something you can then sort of refer back to as you're preparing for your next supervision. The other time that notes will come in handy, excuse me, is when you're working on some of the evaluation and reflection stuff. So it's sort of a record, written record of the things that you've talked about, and the content of each of those supervisory sessions. All right, let me just move myself down here now that the content is up. So this idea of kind of negotiating for what you need is part of how you prepare for supervision. So this goes back to sort of actively thinking about the content, and writing an agenda, and coming in with sort of questions and things like that you want to talk about each week. So supervision, though, isn't necessarily a conflict-free time. A good supervisor will challenge you. A good supervisor will push you, and that's important for your growth. It's not necessarily comfortable, and this is sort of when I said a few minutes ago that learning to become a social worker is a tough process and has sort of an emotional component to it. Those times when we're pushed and when we're challenged by our supervisors, those can be really sort of frustrating or angering kinds of times. Again, if you feel like something is out of your comfort level, that's the time to get in touch with me and to talk about this. I can offer it sometimes a different perspective, where if something really is bothering you or inappropriate, that's the time to ask me to get involved, so that we can also ask the school to get involved. If so, like I said, if you're really struggling with something, like ask me to get involved, and if we determine that it's inappropriate, we'd sort of get the school involved. Negotiation and assertiveness, these are sort of essential sort of ideas for social work practice in general. Social workers are good at really sort of mediating difficult and challenging kinds of situations, but we're not born good at mediating and negotiating these kinds of challenging situations. That's part of the process of growing into a professional social worker. So the question I always get when I teach this class is, what if you can't complete the assignments for class? Let me know. So I don't have like any blanket generic policy or procedure that we can adhere to. But when that happens, I work with students one-on-one to figure out what it is we can do. So my theme in some of these videos that I've recorded here has always been, if you're struggling, get in touch with me. And I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but when it comes to the assignments, if it looks like you're not going to be able to complete something, let me know so that we can sort of develop a plan. Let me just advance this here to the last slide. So assertiveness is something that social workers often develop in the context of supervision, and it's kind of this ability to communicate what you're trying to say without harming other people. The book uses the term violating their rights. And they sort of have listed out 4 steps. in being assertive, and that has to do with clearness and specificity, being direct, open, and honest, sort of standing behind your message, and then asking for feedback about how this went. If there's a time when you're thinking, okay, I have to go into this situation being assertive, and you'd like to practice, let me know. I could let you. We could sort of do some role playing. I can let you know how that process sounded to someone on the outside. So, just a few concluding comments. Like I said, supervision is sort of an integral part of the process of becoming an independent social worker. Supervisors should be supportive and challenge you sort of at the same time. Remember, this is part of your professional obligation, your professional duty. So it's important to be prepared for supervision and be actively thinking about the things that you can bring to supervision each week. And then sort of the last message, which is part of all the videos that I record, if something's not going right, or if you're really challenged by something, get in touch with me so that I can kind of help you think it through. Okay, hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.